Hello, it's Mr. Curtis. I'm going to take you through how to answer the question, but I'm going to look at one aspect of answering the question, and there will be other videos like this that will help you. And I suggest you watch all the videos because they'll work together to try and help you get the best that you can in the assessment. A quick reminder, this is all looking at paper 2 of the literature and the one with the most marks to gain on it. There are 3 sections and we're looking at section B, the power and conflict, and we're just looking at cluster 2 poems, the poems to do with setting. So what is the examiner looking for? Well, there are 3 things the examiner's looking for. The first thing is your ability to answer the question and your ideas, your ability to use quotations. The second thing is AO2, terminology, your ability to spot techniques, and your ability to talk about how those techniques, words and structure and form, how they affect the reader or the audience. And finally AO3, which is to do with the context and kind of the reasons behind the writer's choices. Why did the writer do this and what's their reason for doing it? So those are 3 things that we're looking for. Now, to help make sure you address those in your writing, we use this acronym PUT, P-U-T, to help you kind of structure those ideas. And we go very, very quickly through it, and you'll see through this example that I'm going to go through now with you. So, very simple question. How does Charles Dickens present Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol? Well, the P represents presents. So, you need to be thinking about how does the writer present it. So what interesting idea can you tell us? So Dickens presents Bob Cratchit as a victim of society. Now that's my own word that I've used, and it's an idea that I've come across when I'm looking at the text itself. So it's not in the text, it's something I've added to it. Very, very simple, that's your idea. So my idea is that Bob is being presented as a victim of society. The next bit is the uses. Okay, so what is Dickens using to show me this idea that he's a victim in society? And here I'm using the idea of the symbol of the small coal fire. That's how I know he's a victim in society, because Bob's got a small fire, Scrooge has got a big fire, and Scrooge has got loads of coal, so he's in power, he's got control about it. So that's my technique. So what technique has Dickens used to show us that idea there? And then finally it's the teachers, or the why. And I put down here the writer teaches that there's a clear inequality in society. So Bob having a small fire and Scrooge having a bigger fire shows the inequality and how the poor have the inability to change the situation at the moment because Scrooge has the coal. And so you can see how these 3 elements link together. Now obviously your paragraphs will be a bit bigger than that, but that's just to give you an idea of how you can address those 3 different things. So presents is your ideas, answering the question, uses is your terminology and the techniques, teaches is about the context, the message and the reason behind choices. Now we're going to focus on one of those things. We're going to look at AO1 today and we're going to look at how it presents things. So what are the common mistakes that students make? Well, the key thing is not answering the question. Okay, some students like to think that, you know, there's a list of things that the examiner's looking for and you've got to mention as many of those things to get as many marks as you can. That's not right. Okay, what the examiner wants to see is you answering the question. So if the question is asking you about setting, you talk about setting. They don't want you to waffle about something else. And that's where learning set essays at home will not help you, because really the examiner will be choosing a question that will be making you think. And they want to see you thinking. They don't want to see you regurgitate a ready-made essay because they want to see what you come up with. Another problem, students write the first thing that comes to mind, so they just kind of dump everything that they've got in their brain on the page and hope that that's good. It never is. And also telling the poem in your own words and just telling the examiner what the poem's about. A lot of students try to retell the poem, and really the examiner will have probably seen about 300 essays before they get to yours, so they know the poem, and so it's quite insulting. We've mentioned about the chucking everything at the examiner. Another thing that students tend to do, and this is a mistake, is focusing on techniques rather than ideas. Always start with ideas first and then link into techniques. And again, quotations. A lack of quotations really holds students back. Okay, so this is the practice question we're going to work through today. We're going to go through it together. Feel free to pause at any point so you can kind of make notes and have a bit of a think of yourself of how you'd respond to the question. So we're going to look at the thread presents. So we've got the question there. This is the question. So the first thing you should do is, rather than rush to write everything down, have a little bit of think about what the question is asking you to do. So I'm going to have a look at it now. So the impact. It uses the word impact. So impact of something means like the consequence. So is it a big consequence, small consequence, an obvious one, or a subtle one that people can't see? And what are the emotions it's creating? So what emotions does London create? What is it making people think? And why do they think and feel these kind of emotions? These are questions we quickly jump, but you really need to do that to address this question properly. And then finally, what are the big ideas? Okay, well, London is making them feel this, but what is the writer really talking about? So here's what I kind of quickly jotted down. So what's the impact? Well, the impact, it's a big impact in London, isn't it? It's affecting all parts of society. And it's obvious because this person has just walked down the street and he's seen everybody with these marks on their faces of this unhappiness. What's the emotions that it creates? Well, we can see that there's misery and depression, marks of woe on everybody. And we can see that sense of trapped, that cycle of misery, that they born and die in misery. And so we've got the children who are miserable, the adults who are miserable. And we've got that idea of the phrase of the mind-forged manacles. This idea that people are trapped into this way of thinking, there's no sense of escape. And why do they think and feel this? Well, if we look at the phrase chartered, it's that idea of the government controlling everything and the church with the blackening walls. And you can see that this idea that the blackening could be the soot from the Industrial Revolution, from the factories. And then we've got the class system, and then we've got this increased urbanisation of London in particular, the idea that they're moving away from being natural and a rural environment to being this one of systems and machines. So what are the big ideas it could be addressing? Well, we've got about the Romance movement, which was in a way attacking the Industrial Revolution. Anti-establishment, so the idea of organisations controlling people and making people miserable. And obviously we've got the Industrial Revolution. So all of these are ideas. So far I've got them just by thinking about my response to that question. I've not even looked at the second poem, but I've got a good grasp of this poem and I can say what the impact is in London. So the second part of this is comparing it. So then once you've done that with the first poem, have a look at your second poem. And your choice of poems is really important, because often what happens is students try to crowbar the first poem or their favourite poem, and you really do need to have a bit of a think. Now in the anthology and in the exam you will have a list of the other poems, so we would suggest that you look through the list of other poems and think about what would be a best combination. Sometimes the most obvious combination is not the best one, because actually everybody will have chosen that poem, and so you want a combination that's going to be interesting, and that's better if it comes from you. And think about, in this situation, what would be the most obvious poem, and try to avoid the most obvious poem. Go for an interesting, subtle, clever connection between poems rather than the most obvious one, because the most obvious one will be the one that the examiner's marked 100 times. So, and if they've marked it 100 times, they probably would have seen all the ideas, and so there's nothing new. So if we have a look then, so we've got our ideas here. I'm going to go with extract from the prelude, and we're going to go with this idea. So what could we say about extract from the prelude then? So the thing about the extract from the prelude is that it isn't a massive impact on a person. It's about one person. It's a personal impact. The emotions, well, this idea of it being haunted and a nightmare that the setting creates for them, this massive mountain that kind of scares him, and that idea of fear and dread for nature that we've got. Very different emotion to how we've got in London. And then we've also got an interesting concept called the sublime. And the sublime is this idea of kind of like awe, kind of impressed, but also scared at the same time, which is what we've got here in the poem, that sense of being impressed, but also slightly scared at the same time. So that's another idea that we've got here. It makes us think about how nature has a hidden power, and we don't realise how scary nature can be. We've also got the idea of how the duality of nature, that nature can be lovely, sunny, grass, beautiful, but also it can be something dangerous, and that's hidden behind that beauty, and that's what we see in the poem. We've also got this idea that mankind thinks he's more powerful than God. Here we've got a man going out on a boat and thinking he's in control, and he's thinking he's in charge, and then suddenly nature reminds him that there's something bigger and powerful. And that could be a point of the Industrial Revolution, because man thought he was controlling the world and he could control the world, and yet in this poem it's nature is the thing to be scared of. We've got lots of ideas, big ideas. Religion. We've got religion in terms of not necessarily about Christianity, but this idea of faith in nature and the power of nature. We've also got the fragility of man, how weak man is, and this idea of Darwinism. This idea of survival of the fittest. Well, man likes to think that he's survived because of Darwinism and because he's stronger, but actually, is nature more powerful than man? Now once you've got those ideas ready, you can start presenting and pulling them all together. So here's just some ideas that I've got put together. So Blake presents a setting as symbol of how effective a government is in supporting its subjects and ultimately making society happy or sad. Wordsworth presents setting as superior to mankind and make him feel insignificant and inferior. Now what you can see with both of those, and I've highlighted them, but actually I'm addressing several parts of the actual question. I've got an idea, a big key idea, the symbol of how effective government is. That's my big idea that I'm going for, that concept that's really, really big, but it's hidden in the text. The other one I've got is superior to mankind, and that's hidden in the text. Then I've got in red, the emotions. So I've kind of got more than one thing. So we feel sad because it's the government. Okay, we feel inferior because nature is more powerful than mankind. And that just to give you a bit of an idea of how to address your opening idea. And then when you can go a bit further with that, then you can take it and have a look at the techniques. So how does it show that mankind is insignificant and inferior? How does it show that the governments don't support their subjects? And the reason why I've included the one in the blue box underneath is because the one in the blue box just shows you an awful one. That tells us nothing. And to give you a point of comparison with the other ones, you're looking for something really, really clever, but also something meaningful that addresses the question. A few little tips here, how you can deal with this and how you can get this idea really well. Show off your vocabulary. If you look at the example, insignificant, inferior, superior, that's showing off vocabulary. Those words help you to explain. Think of big, wider ideas. That superior into inferior, that's a big concept about our relationship with nature. Nice little phrases here that you can try and use that helps deal with these big concepts, and that's power of, the battle between, and the conflict between. So you could say, for example, in the prelude, it's the power of nature. Or we could say the battle between man and nature, or the conflict between man and nature. And so you can see how it clearly fits into that way there. Right, before I leave you, have a little bit of think about what other poems you could compare with London. I've gone through the prelude, but you could use some of the other poems. So what other poems could you use, and how could you link them in from the idea's point of view? Stay tuned, there'll be another video shortly, one to do with how looking at the other parts of the PUT acronym, okay, looking at the U and the T.